it's not what you do. You could do anything well. I'm here to tell you what you probably will like doing, because if you like doing it, then you're probably going to do it more. And when you do it more, then you'll get good at it. We're not instinctively born great at anything unless you're like Mozart or something.
This is A Joyful Rebellion, the podcast that explores that moment you realize the life and success you worked so hard to create didn't come with all the fulfillment you thought it would. I'm your host, James Walters, and I want you to be the author of your own story. Each week, I connect with people who inspire bold answers to the question, what do I do now to create a life I love? If you're ready to start answering that question for yourself, you're in the right place. So let's start a joyful rebellion. You've probably taken a personality test before, but what if the results barely scratch the surface of who you really are? Eric G. is the creator of the Project Utopia framework and the author of The Power of Personality. It's a refreshingly fun and values-based take on personality typing. And after decades of working with teachers, parents, students, and teams, he's personally profiled more than 50,000 people and built a model that focuses not on labels, but on what actually drives us. Instead of letters or numbers, Eric uses memorable animal archetypes grouped into 4 packs. Packs that reflect core values like safety, self-knowledge, creativity, and risk. In this conversation, we unpack how personality typing can help us better understand our families, students, partners, and even ourselves. Eric breaks down why most models focus on surface-level traits, how our early environment shapes our identity, and why being honest about what we value might be the most powerful shift of all. Whether you're a personality test junkie like me, or just trying to figure out why certain people push your buttons, this episode is a playful, insightful, and surprisingly practical dive into what makes us tick. Eric G., thank you for being here on A Joyful Rebellion today.
Thanks for having me, James.
A lot of people don't realize this about me, but how hard I geek out and nerd out on personality profiles. I don't know what it is, but well, I do. It was back in the late 80s, probably early 90s. And Eric, I don't know how old you are, but if you remember the days when you could buy a computer at Radio Shack.
Yes, I'm that old. I remember.
Yeah. Okay. That's cool. So most of my audience is that old, so they would remember, oh yeah, Radio Shack. They had all the cool gadgets, but you could buy computers there. And my uncle, who always seemed to have all the cool gadgets of the time, he had one of those computers, and I don't even remember what it was called. I do. It was called Mind Prober, and it was like it was basically a personality test. It asked you a whole bunch of questions. I was still a teenager, and I was like, okay, let's check this out. And then you could print out essentially what your personality was, and man, it was so spot on. I was like, this is sorcery. What is going on here?
And I bet you could print it out on one of those printers that would like go back and forth, like,
oh yeah,
that sound. Yeah, dot matrix.
That dot matrix with the holes on the side.
Yes, and you had to pull that. Remember to rip that off.
Yeah, you had to rip off that. Yeah, those were the days, man. But it was so fascinating to have that insight into myself just from answering a series of questions. And you've written a book. Well, before we even start talking about the book, we want to talk about the fact that you have been in this space for quite a long time. You've developed even your own personality profile. And once you had a ton of research, you talked to a lot of people, you wrote a book. It's called The Power of Personality. And as you describe it, it's a culmination of decades of research and application. And you have personally typed over 50,000 people. That's a lot of people. I don't know if I've talked to that many people in my life.
I'm sure you have. It's one of those things where we count, like, how many people have we talked to? You know, owning an education company, I interacted with a lot of people. So I think maybe if you add that all up, I'm sure. And also personally, right, we always talk to people every day. And I think it just depends how we talk to them.
Yeah. What got you fascinated about personality types, and where were the holes in other models that you saw where you were like, you know what, I think there might be a different way? And so you paved your own path with it. So get us the backstory on that.
I was a lot like you. You know, I was really fascinated with personality tests and figuring out things about myself, right? I think it's also important because when you're feeling a little different than other people, and I think that's one of those things that I stress as a huge difference with my methodology. A lot of times, the differences that a lot of these tests focus on are very superficial differences, right? What do you see on the outside? Someone more introverted, extroverted, more active, more talkative. But some of the things that I found, especially growing up, were that some of the values that I had were different than some of the values that the people around me had. That can cause a lot of conflict. So I just wanted to realize, or at least figure out why I was so weird, I guess. And I started reading up about personality. I'm like, oh, okay, it's not so weird. It's just different. And then from then I started my education company. Well, I had to go to school and all that kind of stuff. I don't have to go to school, but I went to college and did different things. I actually studied screenwriting. But I came back as I started my education company. And from there, I started seeing kind of flaws in some of the previous methodologies. One of the ones that I mentioned was that they focus so much on the superficial. And I worked with maybe 1,000 students a year through my company. And with 1,000 students, you see about 1,000 parents or 1,000 couplings. And you get to really start seeing how each personality feeds or bounces off one another and the possible conflicts. And that's where the research and application came in. Was I got to actually see it up front. And that's when I just started developing my own. And based on some of the flaws that I saw in others, I started developing something that was a little bit more focused on values, as I'd mentioned before. And yeah, I went from there.
Got it. So your personality type is focused more on values. What would you say, I mean, outside of some of the superficial things, how would you categorize what a lot of like the Myers-Briggs or the Enneagram, if they're not values-based, what are they based on more so?
Well, Myers-Briggs is the one I studied the most, right? And I still like it. I don't like say it's super flawed. I was just thinking more, Myers-Briggs is based on a dichotomy of 4 priorities. And they do the extroversion. Are you extroverted or introverted? Or are you intuitive or are you sensing? Like how you get your information, right?
Yeah.
But one of the things that oftentimes I got complaints about when talking about it was that people are like, well, I'm introverted in this situation, but I'm extroverted in this situation. And I was like, well, I can't argue with that. That's actually true. So I had to figure out a way where that could explain that. And I think if you separate people into 4 different groups, which I do, I separate people into 4 different packs. And then within those packs are 4 different animals, personality types. But each pack values something differently. So it would make sense that if you value this, then there's more likelihood that you'll be outgoing and your energy will be outward and project outward in that particular field. But if you value this, then it's going to be outward in that instance. But obviously, if you don't value this thing, then you're not going to be you're going to be introverted.
Oh, that's really fascinating. And get us a little more behind the curtains on what you started developing. So it sounds like the personalities are based on different animals.
Yes. Animals are really easy to remember, I think. So people, like with MBTI, right? You're like, oh, I'm an IJL. People often forget. Now, certain types do not forget. Certain types are like, no, I know this and I remember it. But, most of the time people forget at a casual level. But most people do not forget when I've called them a shark. They're like, oh, I'm a shark. I'm a fox. Foxes and sharks like being those. Others are not so, they feel their animals aren't as flattering. But, But mine isn't either. So I don't really care if people say it's unflattering because, I always tell them mine, and they're like, "Oh yeah, that's not a great animal." So
that's funny. So is the process of figuring out what animal they are is kind of similar to some of the others? You answer a series of questions of things that you value.
Obviously, I have a test on my website, or what they call it, a CTA, and people can click it and take it. And I like my test. Once again, it's not a series of questions. It'll ask you to prioritize certain words. And I've gone through, I've used or tested it with like thousands of people. Once again, though, it's a test. So I would say it's fairly accurate, but I always tell people, read the results. And if you don't think that the results fit, maybe find a animal personality type that's quite similar. So I mentioned, since there's 4 animals and each of those animals are within a certain pack, if you're within a pack, then you're going to be similar to the animals in that pack. So oftentimes you might get one animal, but if you read the other animals within that pack, you'll be like, oh, you know what? I'm actually more like this one. And because mainly the 4 packs are determined based on specific values. The first one would be safety and security. Half the population is in that pack, and that's kind of what we're taught at an early age. But I always like to mention that because the other half of the population does not value safety and security as highly. And I think it's important to know that whether you're on one side or the other, so that you can start appreciating each other, right?
And what are the 4 animals? Right? You talked about the shark and the fox.
Okay, so this is getting really wonky. I hope you don't mind if it gets...
Okay, that's cool. So I love it.
So there's 4 packs, and they're the gatherers, the hunters, the shamans, and the smiths.
Okay.
And as you imagine those four roles in a medieval village, what each of those provide. So the gatherers provide safety and security. They make sure we have all the supplies. We make sure they bring in the harvest and that we're safe and we're not starving. Hunters, of course, are about a third of the population. And they go out and they do exactly what they intend to do. They hunt. And they are far more risk-taking. They like excitement. Kind of have to. You kind of like that adrenaline. You're going to go out and hunt like a wildebeest. And then there are the smiths and the shamans. And they make up about 8% of the population each.
Okay.
So it's a very small percentage. And the shamans, just like any shaman, they kind of have the emotional, spiritual pulse of the village. And they seek self-knowledge. And then the smiths are the creators of tools. And to create those tools, they need information. So they seek information. Even within each of those packs, there are four animals, and the foxes and the sharks are within the hunter pack. So they love excitement and they love testing themselves.
Yeah. So in all, there are 16 animals.
Yes, just like Myers-Briggs.
Yeah, and they're in 4 different groups. I think I know what group I belong in, but I don't know for sure. Well,
can I guess? Let me guess later. Whenever you want me to guess, I will guess.
Okay, just jump in when you're ready. But just knowing my Myers-Briggs, knowing my Enneagram, I geek out more on the Enneagram than the Myers-Briggs. And let me ask you this. It feels like, or it seems like, I don't know how it feels, but it seems like there are personality profiles that are more appropriate maybe for the workplace, and then some that are maybe more holistic. So, for example, I've talked to a lot of people about the DISC profile, and that's also 4 different quadrants, but in a very different way than you're processing it. So have you found that to be true, where maybe a certain personality profile is good if you're in a school setting or in a work setting to help understand the dynamics of maybe those relationships that are happening, but they fall short in maybe like romantic relationships, for example?
Focus on specific skill sets are very useful and practical in a work setting because, obviously if you're a manager, you can go, okay, this is going to be what their strengths are and I can utilize those strengths. I will say that knowing someone's values is really important in terms of how to communicate with them. I would teach this to my teachers at my education company, right? Because a lot of teachers, and this is a good thing, a lot of teachers fall under the gatherer pack. That's a natural thing. I'd say probably like 85% of teachers are gatherers, and they create a safe and secure environment for their students. But of course, if let's say you have a gatherer teacher and you have a hunter student, and this holds true in the workforce as well, the gatherer who's going to seek safety and security is not really going to understand this hunter kid who all they want to do is have fun and like jump on the monkey bar or hang on the monkey bars. And then they're the kid who ends up coming back like the fall and has a broken arm because they were, I don't know, playing around during the summer. I would tell my teachers, hey, don't tell them to be careful. I know your natural instinct is to say, be careful. Whenever they're doing anything, be careful. But that takes away their natural strength because hunters don't see the world that way. They don't see the world as, if you tell them to be careful, they're basically being told that their risk-taking is wrong. So all you have to do is change your wording and say focus or concentrate. And I think that reads differently, right? For someone who takes risks, they're like, oh, okay, that's cool. I can take risks. I just have to focus when I do it. I can juggle chainsaws as long as I'm making sure that I catch them. And so, that does help in the workforce as well, knowing how to communicate with each person so that they really understand and there's some kind of connection.
Yeah, and you talk a little bit about how knowing and understanding yourself, understanding your own personality can be a superpower in a lot of different kinds of relationships. But let's talk about your spouse, your partner. How does that come into play if someone has maybe, let's say they're 12 years into a marriage or a relationship right now with a romantic partner, and they're looking at the work that you've been doing, maybe even got your book, and they're like, okay, let's finally figure each other out. In people that you've talked to who have had a similar situation than that, are there a lot of aha moments that come up for them?
Yeah, and it could be an aha moment. You can read it as a bad thing. I don't know. Sometimes people are like, wow, why am I with this person?
Oh yeah, I guess.
Yeah. Right. And not necessarily you can like someone and appreciate them for what they are, but oftentimes when you're in that kind of relationship, as we all know, we often try to change our significant other. You could say that you're attracted to the opposites, and oftentimes we are, but deep down inside, if that person doesn't value some of the same things that you do and you don't appreciate their values, then you're going to clash, and then it's just going to cause conflict. And you might not understand it, like you said, for 12 years until you read a book that's, it's okay for that person to be that way versus the way you are. And they're just really different. My parents something that I got up close and personal, had very different values. But I do think that as long as you can appreciate the other person, that is obviously key. But that's a lot easier said than done.
Yeah, let's talk about just in a family dynamic when, like, the family you grew up in, you didn't get to choose those people like you do often your spouse. And so there can be a family unit with wildly different values among siblings and, like you mentioned, parents. So in all the 50,000 people you've talked with and all of this data you've collected and just the sense of it that you've gotten from the years of working with people, what creates one personality over the other? Is it nature? Is it nurture? Is it a combination?
That I don't know. Like, I always say the safe bet is just to say both. I've worked with really young kids where they show it at a really early age, but then others do not. I'm always of the mindset, like, if your personality, if you are an easy person to read when it comes to your personality type, that's generally a good thing.
Okay.
Because it generally means you have a lot of confidence in who you are and it kind of exudes that energy.
Yeah.
And it's, oh, okay, I know what this person is. Sometimes it can be really difficult, though. I've had difficult moments where I've worked with students who not particularly confident, and that's an understatement. And I had to really delve in there and figure it out. And I think it often, like you were saying, like, gatherers make up half the population, right? So if you have two gatherer parents who like safety and security, and you're that kid who, let's say, is the shaman who likes self-knowledge and wants to figure yourself out, that's not a priority for your parents. They're not like, no, don't figure out what you like. I'll tell you what you like. You just need to figure out how to do it.
Yeah.
You know, that can cause a bit of conflict. So I think the parent-child relationship is one of those things where, you know, I had a lot of teachers that worked for me, and the ones that were parents picked up the personality typing the quickest. They were just like, oh, no wonder why I dislike this kid and I like this kid more,
Yeah.
right? Like, that's what I said. Like, I don't like my daughter more than my son, or vice versa. I don't hate them. I love them equally, but I do like one more than the other. And they started realizing, oh, it's because we share similar personality, so we kind of understand each other.
Yeah,
quicker.
that's a real thing. And even though I would imagine a lot of people would not admit that. That can certainly happen. Well, is there an age at which you think that personality type is pretty fluid, and then at a certain age it sort of gets cemented a little bit more?
I'm not absolutely sure about that. I do think probably when you're probably 2 or 3, it's fluid, but I'm sure personality just depends on the person. Sometimes, like, a 5 or 6-year-old kid who can often really know themselves, and a 15-year-old or 50-year-old doesn't. And I think sometimes, and I keep mentioning gatherers, we have so many in the population, and they're often our teachers. They tend to have more confidence in themselves at an early age.
Okay.
Right? Because everything that they value, they're also being told that they should value it. It's only until they're the type where they hit their 40s and they get their midlife crisis because they've lived a life thinking that everything they've done, they've never really had to reflect on why they do the things they do. And then they hit 40 and they're like, oh, shoot, like, I gotta start figuring things out. I always like to joke around and say shaman types, on the other hand, the ones that seek self-knowledge, don't have a midlife crisis because their whole life is a midlife crisis. They're always like questioning themselves and figuring out, oh my God, am I doing the right thing?
Yeah.
I don't know. But the nice thing is, by the time they're like 40 or 45, they've kind of put in some of the work, and they generally will have a little bit more intrapersonal intelligence than the average person.
That's fascinating. Okay, so there is this concept, and I've studied the Enneagram a lot more than any of the others or Myers-Briggs. There's this concept of kind of what you were alluding to just now, where at some point in life, things sort of switch to maybe a little different version of your personality. And in the Enneagram, like, whatever number you are, you have a number on either side of it, like a personality type on either side. And what I've experienced, and also what I have read in some of the research, is that at some point you do flip. Like, I'm a 9, and so my whole life I grew up with a wing 1, which means I was very detail oriented. I was going to follow the rules and all of this stuff. I hit probably 45, 50, just right around the time you're saying. And I could care about none of that anymore. I have completely flipped to the 8, which is more assertive, more understanding exactly what you want out of a situation and doing the things that are needed to get there, being more direct. In your experience, have you seen that? How does that fit in with your personality typing?
Yeah, it sounds how you describe yourself a lot like a smith, or the journey of a smith. Some of the smiths types can be very pragmatic, but at an early age, they're not gatherers. So they're going to follow the rules, but not necessarily for the reasons that a gatherer might follow the rules. They'll just be, okay, I'm going to do this because I'm told, and I probably should do what I'm told, not because I believe in it, but because it's going to put me in the least amount of trouble.
That's spot on. Yeah.
Right. And then as they get older, they're like starting to get more power. And I'm realizing I can create the rules for myself. I have the ability now. Maybe I didn't have that at 5 to do it, but now as I'm older, I have the ability to create my own rules, create my own companies, build my own things. And thus, I don't really care about all that stuff anymore. I do care about pushing myself out there and putting myself, but not necessarily in the way that I did as a 5-year-old.
Right.
Let's say.
Okay. So it sounds like nothing magical happens. It's just the culmination of a lot of life experience. And hopefully what came with that life experience was more confidence and self-assurance, self-knowledge.
Yeah, I always like to say we can either grow into better versions of ourselves or worse versions of ourselves. And that's why it's important to figure out who we are so that we can kind of grow on the right path or walk up the right path. But I also say puppies don't grow into cats, they grow into dogs. So I do think whatever seedling we have early on is going to lead to something either bad or good. But the only really bad thing is if we start trying to change it into building into something that we are not.
Yeah.
I think that can be a bit dangerous.
Oh, that's a good point. But it kind of goes back to the same thing, talking about if we have a partner and we're trying to change them into something they are not, so it fits what we want a little bit more. We can't do that with them, and we can't really do that with ourselves.
Yeah, if someone actually changes, that's probably emotionally unhealthy, right? Because they can't. So it's basically always equated to like making a lefty use their right hand.
Yeah.
If you hammer a lefty enough, they're going to be able to use their right hand, but really they probably should have used their left their whole life.
Exactly.
That doesn't seem right.
And I remember my grandfather talking about that. He was of that generation where if you were going to school and you were left-handed, they was like, no, there's something wrong with that. And so he was ambidextrous, but I think he, like you mentioned, when he got the power to say, I'm left-handed, I'm going to use my left hand, that's what he did. So there is, and I think you talk about it in some of your materials, the traditional school model does try to fit most people in a certain mold, in a certain box. What are some of the things that you get from teachers? Because it sounds like you've educated a lot of teachers over the years, and they're part of that system. They're in that system. Sometimes they're doing what they're told to do, even though they might see a lot of their students fall through the cracks because of it. What are some of the dynamics at play there?
It's tricky. It's different with every teacher. Once again, like personality types, a lot of teachers are gatherers, and it doesn't mean that gatherers can't see that they make up a majority, but not everyone should follow their way, right? Like, once again, that's just an immature gatherer that would have difficulty doing that. So one of the goals that I had was, since I had so many gather teachers, was to teach this personality typing so that they kind of got off that mentality of not every kid is going to have an organizer. I remember growing up, and I kind of felt bad. Like every year I had a new organizer, and your teacher's like, make sure you put your homework in there. I'm like, I'm going to do it this year.
Yeah.
This is the year I'm going to change.
Yeah.
And then a week into it, I end up just taking my homework and just smashing it in my backpack.
It's just at the bottom of your backpack and all crumpled up. Yeah.
Yeah, it gets pushed down by the books that you throw in there. And I've been okay. I didn't end up in a terrible way. So I think if we can just focus on our strengths, and teachers help kids focus on those strengths, we'll first help the kids discover those strengths and then focus on them, I think we would have a little bit better education system.
A lot of teachers have that burden of they've got a ton of students, but they also have a ton of just administrative stuff, like keeping up with all the machine of the education system with the grades, all the measuring that has to happen. So it could be tough to say, oh, this person over here needs something a little bit different than my other 25, 30 students that I have.
A lot of shamans become teachers as well. And shamans are that type, the burnout teacher, where they're like, oh my God, like this is so fun. I'm going to help my kids grow and learn about themselves, because obviously shamans seek self-knowledge, but they also want to help others find their own self-knowledge. But like you mentioned, the system, especially in public school and especially in elementary school and let's say high school, making wear you down. They're like, oh no, you need to fill these things out, make sure they do these assignments, fill these requirements. The irony is a lot of the education professors, like in college and universities, tend to be shamans. So they're telling these teachers, this is what you want to do. You want to help your kids grow holistically. But then the teachers get in the trenches and then they're like, oh no, but I'm being told I have to do all these different things. And that can be a bit wearisome.
That makes total sense because they're coming from just a completely different place. It's kind of like the coach and the player model. The coach is coaching the players, but they're not out actually playing on the field themselves.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's fascinating. And I saw in your profile, well, I guess in your spare time, you like to do magic. Is that right?
Yeah, I do a little bit. I like to do a little close magic. I can do a few tricks here and there.
So are we talking like cards?
Card magic generally. we would like promote ourselves to the students because we provided actually free tutoring to kids in underprivileged schools. But there was a lot of competitors. So one of the things that I did was I would do magic to bring kids and parents over. It was really to bring the kids over so that they would be distracted while their parents would talk to my director.
Sure.
But then the only problem is certain parents would be like, oh, I'm kind of interested in that magic trick. What's happening over there too? But really, it's just a way to help kids understand that you have to be able to see through because there's a lot of illusion in the world, and also just break down the assumptions we have because magic obviously plays with assumptions. And I think that works perfectly with personality. We assume people are going to be like us when they might be very, very different. But yeah, that's one of the things I do.
The whole reason I ask is because it kind of does fold into the personality profile. And I've had this experience before. I've been talking to someone and they're telling me about this situation, and I know them fairly well. I mean, I know them better than just an acquaintance off the street. And they'll be telling me about a certain incident that they had in their workplace or something like that. And I go, well, yeah, of course, because, and then I tell them something about themselves they didn't really realize, because I guess in that particular situation, I have more insight on their personality than maybe they did. It was one of those things where they were taken aback, and it was almost like a magic trick for them, because like, well, how would you know that? I was like, well, you could talk to you for maybe 10 minutes and get a really good sense that these are things that you align with and how that would play out in the situation you just described for me. And they're like, whoa, okay.
Character is destiny. That's the easiest way to tell the future, is to know who we are or know who that person is.
You're right. And it's not that I was really trying to do a profile on them or anything, but it's just certain dots lined up in a conversation, and I was able to give them an insight, and they were really like, aha moment. What is that like for you when you first started working with people? You were able to give them that level of insight, or maybe much deeper insight into themselves. What were some of the reactions that you were getting in the early days?
It's really different. Some people, especially more difficult with adults, obviously, because I think we're more ingrained with who we are, but that can be a bad thing as well. I always use this as an example. I had a friend, actually. She's in my animal typing, she's a peacock.
Okay.
But she said she was an owl. And as you can even imagine, those two animals are very, very different, even though I guess they're both birds, but
they're very different. They have feathers. That's about it.
Yeah. And so she was, oh, I'm this type. I'm like, you're not an owl, you're a peacock. And she's, why would you say that? I'm like, because you're loud. And she's like, yeah, I'm more than loud. And I'm like, well, yeah, but loud is the easiest thing for me to see. And she just didn't even see how loud she was. I mean, she spoke loudly, she dressed loudly. It is one of those things as adults where we've been told this is who we are, but mainly by people who are just looking on the outside. And then we don't realize why we're doing the things we do. And I think that's something that I really focus on with my methodology too. It's not what you do, because we can all do everything. You could do anything well. I'm here to tell you what you probably will like doing, because if you like doing it, then you're probably going to do it more. And when you do it more, then you'll get good at it. We're not instinctively born great at anything unless you're like Mozart or something. So what I found was it was a lot of peeling off the layers for adults. Yeah. Kids are a lot better. I work with a lot of kids, and that's really fun, especially if I find like the minority personality in the kids, because I think they've grown up thinking they're really different and weird. And I love being like, no, you're not weird. Like, you just have a different strength, and I'll be here to help you try to access that strength. I have a student who told me she doesn't want to grow up.
That's my daughter's just like that. Yeah.
She's like, I don't want to grow up. I tell a little bit about her personality type, right? I was like, I totally understand what you mean by that. And I just told my student, like, you're going to grow up, but don't worry. You don't have to grow up in the way that you've been told that you should grow up, or that you think you have to grow up. You can grow up your way, but you're going to grow. That's life.
It sounds like you do a fair amount of myth busting when you're talking to people, and you're maybe breaking down some of those myths about their idea of what personality is, because it's really good to make that distinction that a lot of people associate whatever their personality is with what their abilities might be. But it's really, from what you're describing, it's not so much about their ability, because you can do anything you need to do. Mm-hmm. It's more about your motivation and what motivates you to do what you're going to be satisfied with or happy with.
I mean, I love sports, and if you just look at sports, the most successful athletes, they're all super highly talented and athletic, but at a certain point, the most athletic athletes are not the ones that generally succeed. It's the ones who have the greatest desire and really connect with that. And I think that's a lot like life. Like, it's more important to figure out the things that we want to do than what we are, quote unquote, born to be good at, because I don't think we're born to be good at anything.
Yeah.
We just have to work for it.
You talked about the gatherers who are like 50% of the population, right? What are some of the personality types that are the least common? And when you find one, you're like, oh, okay, this is cool. I want to talk to this person.
Well, I myself am a shaman, which we only make up about 8% of the population. So each animal within that makes up approximately 1 to 2%. So I found that when I get shaman students, that is probably, I'm the most effective of those because I know that experience, but also because I can kind of project and say, look, it's okay to be this way. Let me help you discover yourself. The problem with shamans is because we try to assimilate quite a bit, that can be an issue. The other minority type would be the Smiths, and they seek information. They do not try to assimilate, generally speaking. So that can be a good and bad thing. In a way, they're never going to be in danger of being something that they're not. But what they may be in danger of is never interacting with any human life form again, because they're the ones who offend people. I once had someone tell me that. Someone walked up to me and said, did you just invent this category to justify people being assholes? I was like, oh, okay, well, I can tell. I can guess what type you are. But my father was a Smith, so I really do understand that type very well. But they're just the type of people who just say it how it is. They love honesty and truth.
Okay.
You know, whether that truth hurts someone or not, they might not care. I mean, they do care.
Yeah.
They don't care enough, though, to not be honest, generally.
Okay. Interesting.
So those two packs, the shamans and the Smiths, would be like least common packs that you're going to find.
Got it. So what I would need to do is go on your website, which is Project Utopia, and it's spelled out YOU, Topia. And I'll have that in the show notes so no one misses it. So just hit up there in the show notes. But you can go on there and look at a lot of different stuff, but also get your book, The Power of Personality.
Yeah, it's the Power of Personality basically teaches the reader to be the test.
Okay.
It goes through the entire methodology in a fun way. I know I said that in a way that sounds like really like being at school, like a textbook. It is not. Like I make so many, probably too many inappropriate allusions and jokes in there.
Okay.
But my feeling about it, all this stuff is it should be fun. Finding out about yourself and the people around you, it should be a fun experience. So hopefully people feel the same.
Yeah. Well, this is going to be my next read. When you're sitting with someone, do you ask a couple of key questions that you can kind of slide into a regular conversation? And pretty soon you're like, oh, okay, they've shown me that they are XYZ.
I generally use energy, and I know that's a weird thing that makes absolutely no sense, but I think when you've been doing it quite a while, it just becomes like, what energy is this person projecting? And is it similar to the thousands of people you met, right? And like, oh, okay, yeah. And then once you know that and you get that feeling, and this is for me, then there are certain questions that I might ask, like one random question that's more of a confirmation. One time I asked someone, do you like wine tasting? And they were like, I love, like capital letters, love wine tasting. And I'm like, yeah, because oftentimes it's not even the answer, it's how they answer it. I'm like, okay, well, I know exactly what you are.
Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah, they might not even answer the question, or they might answer it in a way, they might say no, but you know that their answer really is yes.
That's a great point.
But be based on the way that they answered it, the awkwardness or whatever. It goes with working with a lot of students, because a lot of young students are really defensive. And not in a bad way, but they're just kind of scared at first. So I tend to use a lot more stimuli. I might say a statement and then see a person's reaction. And that gives me a lot more information than asking a direct question. Because I think when we ask direct questions, people can often put up defenses.
Yeah, or give you the answer they want to project themselves. The way they see themselves in their most ideal, but not necessarily the way it really is. Like your owl peacock.
Yes.
Yeah, example. Okay.
I was like, how many times do you play chess a day? And she's like, I never played chess before. I'm like, you are not an owl. Yeah. Owls almost always have played chess at least once in their lives.
She was clearly a what we call a disco chicken, which is the other way to describe a peacock. So have we been talking enough for you to get a sense of what's going on in my personality yet? I'm just fascinated and curious.
I said something about Smiths, but I'm really feeling a shaman energy. Like shamans seek self-knowledge, and you seem, especially because you want to learn more about yourself. Of course, Smiths also seek information, and information and self-knowledge can seem similar, obviously, but they're different. But I don't know. Like I think I would guess a shaman, and one of the more pragmatic, outgoing shamans, maybe like a dolphin, and they tend to be like leaders and communicators, and very good at working with people at their level. But I don't know if that's getting a good feeling or not, especially how you talked about like, following the rules early, but then realizing, I don't really need to follow these. Because shamans don't always follow the rules. There are other types that kind of will break the rules at an early age because they don't like them. They're kind of chaotic. So that's why it's also important to know what animal you are. They can be very different.
I was generally a rule follower, but I even tell my daughter that she's 16, so she's in high school and she's at that age where grades seem pretty important. And I was like, look, when I was in 10th grade, I was in honors English. On the outside, I was doing smart people things. And all of a sudden, we got this assignment to read this book by Ernest Hemingway. And I started to read it, and it was the driest thing I'd ever read in my life. And I hated it. And I decided I was just going to flunk that grade period because I didn't want to read that book anymore. And I just said no. And for everything else, I got straight A's. But I just had a little attitude problem with Ernest Hemingway. And she's like, whoa, you could do that? And I was like, I guess I did. I didn't give myself an option. I was not going to read that book.
That sounds very shaman-like. Shamans are all like focused on either people or principles, and that's very principled.
Oh my gosh. Well, that's fascinating.
And the funny thing with shamans is they love to read. But you mentioned Hemingway, and Hemingway is a hunter. And so he's focused a lot on that's the cool thing too, because I like to use writers as an example because there's lots of writers with a lot of different personality types.
Okay.
But you can kind of tell based on how they write and what they're writing about. Like Hemingway is very like adrenaline based. He's in the moment. He's describing specific things and actions. He's very action oriented. His characters are always like moving. And I think that shows like his hunter side. But shamans tend to be more like on the Tolstoy side or the Salinger. They like to understand what's going on internally with a character, where I think like in the book Franny and Zoe, it's really just people talking. Essentially, it's just a conversation.
It's just a conversation for 150 pages. Yeah.
Yeah, but I love that. I'm a shaman, and I'm like, this is fascinating because I'm learning about these people. The movement is inside.
Yeah.
But it's each their own. Each one is going to have different styles and different subject matter they like to write about. And that's the beauty of life, is that we're getting all these different personalities to blend together.
That's so fascinating. And I will get back to you on what it is after I read the book. It's going to be fun. And I'll do a little update on this. So everyone listening.
Yeah, tell me what you get. Tell me if I was right with the dolphin. Dolphin or panda? Oh, now I'm hedging my bets now, and I said two. But they are similar.
I can't wait to find out a lot more. Eric, is there anything that you think is really important to talk about that we haven't really discussed or brought up so far today?
Well, I love that you were talking about education and your experience and then your daughter's experience. And obviously I've worked with a lot of teachers, and once again, teachers tend to be gatherers, and there's this fear, like you have to tell your kids grades are important, school is important, it's going to get you this, that. I'm like, but you know that it didn't work for you that way, right? I don't understand why you are so afraid. Like, you think it's going to work differently for them? Life is going to be so much safer and more certain for them. Just be honest. And that's, I think, the one thing is be honest with other people and also be honest with ourselves. I tell my students all the time, hey, I was a terrible student. I always got in trouble. I got sent to the dean's office every year, but I will help you, give you power to succeed in life. That I can do. And part of that is telling people the truth about stuff. So I thought it was cool that you were telling your daughter that story, because I do think it's good to be honest. Right?
Yeah, because there seems to be so much pressure right now. I don't know if it's her school, her grade, whatever it is, her peer group. But I just wanted to lighten things up a little bit and say, hey, this is what was real and we're good. We're okay. It all turned out.
A friend of mine always tells a story. I'm telling my friend's story about her brother, but it's just a funny story where she tells her brother was at this fancy dinner party in Brentwood. There are all these people, lawyers and doctors and stuff, and her brother just went to high school. He's a high school education, but now he runs a bunch of Hollywood shows. This one guy just assumed, oh, you know how it is, how people with college degrees talk differently. And then her brother's like, oh, I don't have a college degree. And he's, oh, how does it feel like being around all these people with advanced degrees? And he's like, I don't know. How does it feel like living in the same neighborhood with someone with a high school diploma?
Whoa.
We don't have to do the things that everyone else tells us that we should do. Because oftentimes when we do those and we expect some kind of certainty, life is not going to give us that anyway. So we might as well just assume life is uncertain, and we got to do our best to navigate it.
Yeah, I think you just summarized what this whole podcast is about. It's called The Joyful Rebellion, because sometime in life, a lot of people get to a point where they did all the things they were told to do or they thought was going to be important to make them successful, to make them happy. And sometimes they get to that point of success and they're still not happy. Then they have to figure out, okay, now what do I do? Knowing a lot about yourself is really going to be powerful in figuring out, what do I do? Because sometimes that involves a little bit of a rebellion against who you've been in the past.
And what you've been told, how you've been told you should be.
Exactly. Well, Eric G., thank you so much for being here, having this conversation, and just dropping so much insight and knowledge on all of us here. I'm totally psyched.
I had a lot of fun, James. I love talking, as you can tell, especially about this topic.
Oh, I love talking about it too. And I'm glad we connected. And I can't wait to find out what personality type I am. Maybe we'll just come back and have another conversation at some point. But I've got all of your stuff, Project Utopia, in the show notes. So people are going to go check you out. Thanks so much for joining me today. And if you have an extra minute, I have a favor to ask. Some of you listen to this show on Apple Podcasts, and a lot of you I talk to are on Spotify or Amazon. I'd love it if you would take just a second to leave a rating or a review. It lets the platforms know that listeners are getting value from the show and suggest it to others who are interested in similar content. And as always, if you have a topic you'd like me to cover, a guest suggestion, or just general feedback, I'd love to hear about that too. Connect with me on Facebook, Instagram, or at ajoyfulrebellion.com.